theatricality and deception. Powerful agents to the uninitiated, but we are initiated.
I'm super excited!
In the late hours of July 30th, upon entering the midsummer evening of 1945, the USS Indianapolis completed a top-secret high-speed mission to deliver uranium and other important components for the first nuclear weapon ever used for combat purposes. Nicknamed Little Boy, becoming one of 2 nuclear bombs that were dropped on Japan. In fact, the information in this video and the video itself is currently blocked by YouTube in Japan. As the giant Navy warship departed from the Philippines, it was abruptly struck by 2 enemy torpedoes sent directly from a Japanese submarine. The Indianapolis sank in under 12 minutes, and of the 1,195 crewmen aboard, approximately 300 soldiers went down with the ship. As for the remaining 890 seamen, danger lurked around every corner. Upon approaching countless days and nights lost floating in the deep, dark, open waters of the ocean, the remaining 890 men were forced to face unknown terrors from the upcoming horrors that could only be described as your worst nightmare. The unlucky survivors struggled with face exposure, extreme dehydration, salt water poisoning, starvation, delusional hallucinations, sun blindness, life-threatening injuries, and endless shark attacks. A top-secret mission can only mean one thing. No one was looking for the survivors. No one knew the whereabouts of the Navy vessel. No rescue mission in the near future. No plan B. The soldiers begin to disappear one by one. Out of the 890 soldiers, only 316 remain to live to tell the tale that will haunt their dreams forever. The sinking of the Indianapolis resulted in the greatest life lost at sea from a single ship in the history of the United States Navy.
And there's times when you pray, and I knew to whom I was praying, and I tell the Lord that I don't want to die.
So what exactly happened to the sinking Navy ship? And the remaining soldiers left afloat to slowly drift along with open ocean, with no food, no drinkable water, deadly conditions, life-threatening injuries, and no rescue, with an enemy right below your feet, following your every movement. Find out right here, right now, at Forgotten History.
It's your late night into the AM conspiracy theorist with the best conspiracy theories on any social media platform. That's right, Conspired Deception. Oh yeah.
Gay!
You've stumbled upon the only channel that climbs to the highest parts of the untraveled earth, swim through the deepest depths of the ocean, and discover uncharted territories as we travel through space and time, just to bring you this brand new special event.
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
Wait a minute, that's not right.
Welcome to Conspired Deception Official, and welcome to Forgotten History, the only series that unearths history's buried secrets. This series is packed full of information that you need to know. They say, history is written by the victors. Human history involving mankind is never set in stone. Information including scrolls, statues, and religious artifacts could all end up being just a small footnote in time as the future becomes the now. We have seen these acts erase historic events in just seconds right before our very eyes. Whether the reasoning being due to war, natural disasters wiping out whole civilizations without a trace, government weaponized machines like controlling and manipulating the weather, or just something as simple as destruction caused by an organized terrorist group. It has always been, and will continue to be, way too easy for an organized group of people to conspire, go into an area with a pre-existing civilization, take over that land, fight, capture, enslave, and or kill the current civilization. Then take all the past and present history like scrolls, statues, artifacts, and religious relics, throw them into a hole to be buried and later forgotten about with the passing of time. A lot of history could be destroyed by men laying down their lives for a better life. Whether you are on the winning side or losing side, history is written with blood, sweat, and tears, which would set the roots to a new foundation, covered, hidden, and disguised with secrets, lies, cover-ups, and murder. All reasons to begin to rewrite history, and since history repeats itself, I'm sure we will continue to see these acts carried out with the future events to come.
We find ourselves is due to our own actions or inactions, because it is our own fault We are the only ones who can change future events. Education seems to me to be a major part of the solution. The remaining part is the abolition of secrecy. Through ignorance or misplaced trust, we as a people have abdicated our role as the watchdog of our government. If we had done our jobs as citizens, we would never have reached this point. Most of us are completely ignorant as to even the most basic functions of our government. We have truly become a nation of sheep.
Well, I didn't know that.
It really is sad when you stop to think about how many lives were lost just to unknowingly upholding the lies converted into our modern history. Countless information lost and or destroyed. Information that could have answered so many unanswered questions. For example, Hitler and the German army. Hitler and his soldiers tried to conquer and take control over the whole world, with destruction, control, violence, death, and trying to enforce their beliefs, agendas, and ideology, destroying anything that stood in the way of their end-game goal. Hitler and his army didn't just take 85 million lives, but they destroyed countless history along the way. Sadly, we will never know the real history that came before World War II in certain countries and areas that the Germans desecrated. So join me for a minute. Let's jump into our imaginary time machine, hit the accelerator to 88 miles per hour, and let's go back in time. That's too far. Let's get back in and go forward. That's better. The 40s. Not exactly the best time in American history. The 1940s were defined by World War II, the Holocaust, atomic bombs, and the beginning of the Cold War. Women were needed in the workforce to replace men who went to war. The United States of America were smack dab in the middle of a 6-year war against Germany. World War I and World War II were a global conflict that lasted from 1939 to 1945. It affected the vast majority of the world's countries. Many participants with scientific capabilities mostly controlled the war behind the scenes, blurring the destruction between civilians and military resources. Aircrafts played a major role inhabiting the strategy. Japan was just an experiment involving demonstrations of the atomic bomb that scared Germany so bad that they surrendered shortly after, resulting in an estimated 70 to 85 million fatalities, mostly among civilians due to the starvation, massacres, and disease. World War II, by far, was the deadliest conflict in history. Our story is set in World War II, but it doesn't really have anything to do with Germany. According to the American history books, on December 7, 1941, Japan attacked the United States Navy vessel base located in Hawaii. The bombing attack was at Pearl Harbor. That killed more than 2,300 Americans. Now, keep in mind that this is what the American school system teaches in history books. To be perfectly clear, this was not the first time that Japan had tried to attack the United States on American soil. Between November 1944 and April 1945, Japan launched more than 9,000 bombs attached to balloons, experimental weapons intended to kill and or cause fire. It took over 70 hours for these balloons to cross over the Pacific Ocean. This now monument that sits in Oregon marks the spot where 6 Americans, including 5 children, were killed by a Japanese balloon bomb during World War II. Surprisingly, this was the only place that anyone was killed by the balloons sent from Japan. But one thing we do know comes from declassified documents and past events. Connecting America is caught behind a lot of its own false flag operations, including the attack on its own civilians. If you don't believe that the United States would do this to their own people, then you need to wake up, my friend, and do some heavy digging and research, and begin to look into Operation Northwoods. Operation Northwoods was a bunch of ideas and proposed false flag operations that originated with the U.S. Department of Defense and the United States government in 1962. In fact, if you start to look into Hawaii around the time of Pearl Harbor, you will begin to notice that nothing was really going on around the time on the island. But yet the American government sent out thousands of newly recruited nurses and docked all the Navy ships at the harbor, with newly added military forces, apparently for no reason at all. According to conspiracy theorists, they claim that this is the calm before the storm that was set up for the attacks itself. If not planned, at least the United States government was aware of the dangers. Coincidentally, there is a mention of a false flag attack on America involving a bombing of its military base in Operation Northwoods. But that is important information for a whole nother episode packed full of secrets, documents, and endless evidence, just like 9/11, 2001, which again, coincidentally enough, is mentioned in Operation Northwoods as well. Our story follows directly after the actions of Pearl Harbor. So let's fast forward to July 26, 1945, 4 years later. The effects of July 26, 1945 have slowly begun to be forgotten with the passing of time. You've heard the story before. You've heard the information about it, not realizing that it was part of the same story. In fact, the movie Jaws portrays a look into the mental imagination, into the haunting experience. Do you remember the drunken speech by Captain Quint? We all know the famous speech. People go into the water, sharks in the water. Quint was referring to the sinking of the USS Indianapolis.
Just delivered the bomb, the Hiroshima bomb. 1,100 men went into the water. Vessel went down in 12 minutes. But our bomb mission had been so secret, they didn't even list us overdue for a week. Very first light, Chief. Sharks come cruising. Shark comes to the nearest man, that man he starts pounding and hollering and screaming. Sometimes the shark would go away. Sometimes he wouldn't go away. Sometimes that shark, he looks right into you. Right into your eyes. Lifeless eyes. Black eyes, like a doll's eyes. When he comes at you, he doesn't seem to be living until he bites you. And those black eyes roll over white, and then you hear that terrible high-pitched screaming. The ocean turns red. In spite of all the pounding and the hollering, they all come in and they rip you to pieces. Lost 100 men. I don't know how many sharks. Maybe 1,000. I don't know how many men. They average 6 an hour. If I bumped into a friend of mine, Herbie Robinson. I thought he was asleep. Reached over to wake him up. Bobbed up and down in the water. It was like a kind of top. He'd been bitten in half below the waist. You know, that was the time I was most frightened. Waiting for my turn. I'll never put on a life jacket again. Anyway, we delivered the bomb.
In today's topic, we will be discussing the tragic true story of the crew members aboard the USS Indianapolis. Fair warning, viewer discretion is highly advised. If you are sensitive to sad content, then you might want to skip this one. The USS Indianapolis was a port-class heavy cruiser belonging to the United States Navy, named after the city itself. Originally launched in November 7, 1931, it had completed dozens of successful missions. The information regarding the ship is chock full of all kinds of different stories. So many, in fact, that the history of the Indianapolis deserves an episode all on itself. The Navy battleship had begun construction in New Jersey. Due to her heavy thin armor, she was reclassified as a heavy cruiser. Then she was equipped with a collection of 9 8-inch 203mm caliber guns, 8 5-inch anti-aircraft guns, 3 saluting guns, and the Indianapolis can travel top speeds of 32.7 knots. That's 37.6 miles per hour, thanks to her 8 boilers and 4 steam turbines. Her full capacity can hold up to 95 officers and 857 enlisted. She is 610 feet 3 inches long, ranging a whopping 584 foot wide. She is also equipped with anti-aircraft cannons and 4 float planes. The Indianapolis spent her early years in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. On January 1st, 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt selected Indianapolis as his ship of state. She carried Roosevelt on 3 separate cruises, including his 1936 Good Neighbor trip to South America, all the way through February 20th to March 10th, 1942. The cruiser earned her first battle star. In 1943, the Indianapolis became the flagship of the United States 5th Fleet. Between May 1943 through April 1945, the Navy vessel earned 9 more battle stars.
The flag raised, and that was our body.
That means it's a light. Come on down there, gonna raise the flag.
We were the command vessel, the fleet, so we were the closest vessel to the island.
He ran and gave me the binoculars. And I remember turning around and telling him, big deal, and gave him back the glasses and walked away.
For the crew aboard the ship, the Indianapolis would experience combat throughout much of its Pacific theater, as the Allies worked to undo ferocious combat of the Imperial Japanese Armed Forces.
Kwajalein, then I was at Saipan, Tinian, Guam, Sea Battle of Philippine Seas, where our task force shot down 403 Japanese aircraft that day. I was at Iwo Jima.
Trying to come in, and then they'd fall down. Boy, it wasn't any more fun whenever we got hit.
And then I was at Okinawa, and it was in Okinawa that we received a suicide plane. One of his bombs went all the way through the ship, and a big gaping hole there to the extent that we had to make our way all the way back to the States for repair. And that kind of changed our directions for the duration of the time I was in service, yes.
On May 1st, 1945, the Indianapolis docked at the Navy vessel shipyard, 25 miles northeast of San Francisco, to undergo extreme repairs. It was there that the crew received orders for a top-secret mission. The end results would go on to determine the final outcome of the war and change their lives forever. On July 26, 1945, the USS Indianapolis was on a top-secret mission. The mission was to carry pieces of the first operational atomic bomb ever used in combat to a drop point close to Japan, where it could later be assembled and used. The after-actions were a direct result of the attack of Pearl Harbor.
Happened to have the guard duty, and my Marine captain came to me and said, we've got something coming aboard. We don't know what it is. And then suddenly there were two proposed to be Air Force officers coming aboard. They had a little canister in a metal cage, the padlock on it. What is that? Who are these Air Force officers? Well, they weren't Air Force officers. They were scientists from Los Alamos, New Mexico, and what they had was a component, a little boy, the uranium that would ignite that first atomic bomb.
Even if they said it was an atomic bomb, it wouldn't have impressed us much because that ship was loaded with bombs and ammunition all over.
The bomb, nicknamed Little Boy, was one of two atomic bombs used for the attack strategy on Japan. The Indianapolis went on to succeed the mission because the nuclear warhead was dropped a few days later on Japan, with both bombs resulting in an estimated 80,000 to 226,000 deaths. But this was not the first time that an atomic bomb had been detonated on planet Earth, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. On July 16, 1945, near New Mexico, scientists of the Manhattan Project detonated the world's first atomic bomb. The device was attached to a 100-foot tower and discharged just before dawn. Since then, there have been 2,121 tests done, involving 2,476 nuclear devices. According to American nuclear bomb history, on September 23, 1992, the United States of America banned all its nuclear testing. The Soviet Union's last nuclear test took place on October 24, 1990, and the United Kingdom's following the action on November 23, 1991. The crew of the Indianapolis set an open course to direct them to the Philippines to meet up with the SS Idaho and collaborate continuing actions for further attacks on Japan. Sadly, the ship would not reach her next destination. Everything was going according to plan, that is, until the Indianapolis came to a quick and tragic halt.
Honestly, as I tell it, it's more than just telling it. I can relive it. I can see and feel and hear.
Upon entering the midnight hours of July 29th, bleeding into the upcoming early hours of July 30th, 1945, the Navy warship was unexpectedly attacked, impacted by 2 out of 6 torpedoes fired from a Japanese submarine. The huge battleship was struck about halfway to its destination.
And then the 29th, the night of the 29th, about 14 minutes past midnight, we encountered a Jap sub.
We didn't have surface radar, we had air radar. So we were always supposed to watch for that submarine or submarines out there and everything, anything that's unusual in the water.
Midnight. You don't see things like that. You don't see a periscope in the water or anything like that.
And we did not know, but there was a Japanese submarine on the horizon.
The moon came out for just that particular time.
About 11 or 12 minutes after midnight, Commander Hoshimoto, he picked us up with a little periscope just barely sticking up out of the water. We couldn't see him, he could see us. We had no underwater sound gear. They sent us out unescorted. He was surprised that we were alone. He fired 6 torpedoes. And that first torpedo, not knowing what it was, but I knew that something happened up there. I could see all of that water and that flame going high in the air. 2 seconds later, another one hit under the number 2 turret, the big 8-inch guns. And then I could see that about 30 feet wide and about 30 feet of that bow of that ship. It's not there. First torpedo cut the bow of the ship off. Immediately I knew that the ship was doomed because I could hear all the bulkheads breaking below.
I was down in the head towards the fantail, and the ship got hit while I was in there. I just fell asleep and boom, and I jumped up and I knew there's something wrong and grabbed my blanket and boom again. And
would have say fire 1 and 2 seconds later, fire 2.
And boom, up in the air I went.
I came down, I seen this flame of smoke and fire coming up out of that hatch.
Sparks and things coming out of that forward boiler stack.
When the second one hit the aviation gasoline, there was a lot of people who just burnt real bad.
I heard this terrible, terrible screaming of men beneath me being burned alive.
I think everybody that was there in that section where I was at got burned.
Then after maybe 30 seconds, a minute of the screaming, it seemed to cease. They had burned up.
Dr. Haynes, he was there on the deck, and he's trying to take care of some of the burned guys.
Many of the men came up badly burned.
I don't think I had any hair. I think my eyelashes were gone.
The ship is somewhat like a funnel moving forward, and all of that water, is coming in and the bulkheads are breaking, and yet word is coming to abandon ship. Well, no word can be passed other than an oral word, because all power, all communication, all electricity, that's out.
Our phones were all dead. Nobody could reach any. You couldn't reach the lookouts or the engine room.
The Indianapolis was fully submerged in under 12 minutes. During the water takeover of the Navy cruiser, a distress signal was sent across the empty airwaves up until the point that all communications were lost.
We couldn't understand why we weren't rescued.
Well, we all thought that surely a ship like that got the SOS off.
First class radioman, J.J. Moran. You sent a signal, right? And he said, yeah. Well, I said, how do you know that signal radiated from the antenna? Well, he said, Morgan, I have a meter there. He said, the meter won't go if there's nothing going through the wire. No, he said, it went.
We were told that a message did get off, so we figured, well, a couple hours, ships will be looking for us.
We didn't figure we'd even have a night in the water. We figured somebody's going to be looking for us.
We were due in Lake Takeoff on Tuesday morning, and we figured, well, if we didn't report, they would start a search for us.
Sadly, their calls for help was either dismissed as a training exercise and or ignored by the Navy Coast Guard. Some believe that someone was playing a joke because there was no scheduled drill training and no clear evidence of any Navy vessel in any nearby waters. Remember, this was a top secret mission,
So secretive that when the Indianapolis didn't arrive at its next known destination, no one got suspicious, no actions were taken, and no one questioned a thing.
Everybody wanted to know what to do. Nobody knew what to do.
There was all kinds of life jackets hanging around the deck of the ship. Asked my Marine lieutenant, permission to cut those loose, and his reply was, not until we get word to abandon ship. Well, the ship is sinking out from under us.
They try to put the blame on the captain about abandoning ship. They could have hollered abandon ship and nobody would have heard it. I mean, it was just a chaos.
Everybody was hollering, go get on the port side, tilt the ship, I said, them guys are nuts. This ship ain't gonna tilt, this ship's gonna sink.
Well, some Navy sailor, he didn't wait to hear word to abandon ship. He began to cut those big canvas bags of life jackets down.
Everybody was taking off, jumping up for the sights. There was a Marine captain that told us not to jump over. You're safe here. Well, not for me. The ship was starting to roll by then and going down by the bow. It's like this way and down.
And there were those who were coming from inside, and you could see that they were flash burned. For them trying to get out, they touch a bulkhead, they leave the skin of the hand on the bulkhead, and now they're pleading. They're out in the open now, they're pleading for help.
The deck of the ship finally became perpendicular to the water. And those poor guys that were that were hurt, there was just not much they could do.
And by now, the bow of the ship gets under. We're listening to the starboard to where you can't stand on the deck. You're waiting for word to abandon ship. Well, for the good captain up there with no electrical power, no speaker, no nothing, all he can do is, as loud as he could, abandon ship, abandon ship, abandon ship.
And we were just laying there, and that superstructure was just leaning, and it's just about to roll over. Captain said, pass the word to abandon ship. Well, all we could do is yell and scream, abandon ship, abandon ship. And so when he said abandon ship, I left him. I left the captain.
One of the fellas that, his name was Curlick, George Curlick, and George was taking a shower when the torpedoes hit. So he didn't bother to put on clothes or anything. He just got off the ship stark naked. We kidded him on that. Said, George, did you turn off the showers?
And then to go over then to that rail then and grab a hold of that rail, you know that you're going to be leaving the ship or the ship is going to leave you. But as I get there, I hold on to that rail. And may I say, there's times when you pray, and there's times when you pray. And I knew to whom I was praying, and I tell the Lord that I don't want to die. I knew that a certain brunette back home that was going to wait for me, Mom and Dad, I don't know what all I promised the Lord, but I want to live. I want to live. And may I say this, I can hear him today. Peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth. Let not your hearts be troubled. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I'm holding on that rail. Don't be afraid. And I knew that somehow, some way, I'm going to make it. And I did not have the least idea what I was going to experience. I left the ship and swam away to see that bow of the ship go under, see that fantail come up, and I saw boys as they were jumping off, and some jumped into those screws as they came down. They couldn't see what's below, but they dared not to allow themselves to be brought under. And it isn't long until maybe 80 of us or so, here we are in that little group.
I didn't jump off the ship. The ship left me.
I saw 200 or 300 men in the water, and then I just run down the side.
I tumbled about 3 different times before I hit the water.
I hit the water and paddled away as far as I could and looked back, and I did see the tail of the fantail of the ship go straight up.
There
there was the guys still coming off. There was like ants on a stick, they're still coming off.
And as that barrel went down, I went right up that barrel. And that was the last thing I touched on the USS Indianapolis.
It started to go down, but when it started, the time was motionless.
And that 12 minutes and the ship traveled quite a ways. And that's why we got spread out.
I looked around and I decided I got to get out of here. So I started swimming.
I was not really afraid of the water. I was a fairly decent swimmer. I was a good swimmer.
Bobby, if I could do anything well, it was swimming.
A lot of them didn't know how to swim, which was sad.
I never did know how to swim, and the Navy never taught me how to swim.
I learned how to swim. I learned how to keep afloat.
300 poor souls of the ship's fleet were trapped inside with no escape. Sadly, 300 soldiers went down with the ship. No way of getting out. Fighting an entirely different kind of battle. Fighting for their very lives instead of freedom itself. The seamen were doomed from the moment of impact, which basically projected the cruiser sinking right into the open water to stray adrift, with the winds of death blowing alongside, just to see their last remaining minutes sinking down deeper into the dark abyss. And just when you thought the story was over, it becomes very clear that this is just the beginning. As far as the remaining 879 soldiers, their story had just begun. Forcefully and unwillingly, the men went into the water. Upon entering the water, they all suddenly realized that it was just as dangerous as the metal coffin they chose not to contribute to. The men entered as what could only be described as a watery hell. As chaos became the new reality, 1/3 of the fleet had been seriously injured from the explosion's aftermath. The sinking happened so fast that no one had time to act rationally and think about the upcoming torturous days ahead. No one had time to grab any survival gear. Roughly half the men were equipped with life vests. Most of the men were covered in oil, left behind from the fuel-filled ship.
I opened my eyes under the water and I could see this big black spot. I thought the ship was coming down on top of me, and what it was oil on the water.
The fuel oil got in your eyes, just burnt your eyes, and got in your throat. You start throwing up.
I couldn't see. I was blind from the diesel oil. I didn't even know. I just popped up out of the water, and he grabbed me, put me on his net with him.
Then I found another Marine. That was my buddy, Spooner. And he'd gone into the water head first. And can you imagine what you look like and how it's going to affect you if you would dive into a half-inch of that black oil that was just covered, and he can't see, and he's desperate. It's a long story with Spooner there. So much that he had to experience now.
Some survival rafts were found, but it certainly was not enough for all the surviving men to fit into.
And there was a life raft, 2 of them, right underneath it. And I realized how fortunate I was. I feel guilty even finding a life raft.
I finally got in a raft, but these other ones that didn't have the raft, or these ones were by themselves.
There's a lot of guys that swim to the raft to get in, but there was no room for them.
Well, where did that life raft come from? We didn't have any.
Well, everybody was on their own, basically, the first 8 hours until the next morning. There was no leadership. There was no way to apply it. You couldn't see anything.
Naturally, you see a buddy out there, you join him, and after a little bit, then we began to kind of congregate, and there was about 80 of us in my group.
We had 2 life rafts in our group that had floated off of the ship, and there were 3 cargo nets.
It was like 20-foot square with corks and rope, So we got that, and somebody come by with a raft, and we tied to that, and we started gathering up the guys. And
those that couldn't get inside the floating nets tied themselves out to the edge.
It was chaos.
Most of the badly wounded people died in the first 8 hours. But there were a few who hung on for a while.
What do we do, sir? What do we do, sir? Well, being an officer, I didn't know what to do, really. I'd never been through this before.
Some of the survivors met the end of their fate within minutes of entering the watery grave due to their injuries. The dark, cold night creeped in, claiming a number of seriously injured. Many soldiers claimed to have heard sounds of moaning and groaning coming from the injured, slowly fading with the moonlight.
I said something. He said, "Is that you, Cox?" And I said, "Is that you, Josie?" And I looked in his face. The skin was peeling off his face. He's flashback.
I asked any Marines. Well, there were 2 Marines. One was a new Marine that had just come aboard in San Francisco, and he was not in my squad, so I didn't know him, but I could tell that he was wounded desperately, but he was dying, and I held on to him. He died really in my arms there.
As the night turned into complete darkness, as thoughts of loneliness began to set in, despite being surrounded by their nearby comrades. Amidst the freezing cold waters, torturous conditions, and thoughts of abandonment, dangers lurk right below the chaotic survivors themselves. Hundreds and thousands of ocean white-tipped sharks, tiger sharks, and great white sharks came to investigate the area due to all the recent newly moved as blood spewed from the life-threatening injured into the surrounding waters.
They found us. They basically circled us.
There were plenty of sharks, and you could see them. The water was crystal clear.
And you could look down in the clear water and see 20, 30 feet down.
And here's all these sharks going around. Come right across your legs like that and everything.
They seem to be gathering in schools and looking us over.
The bigger sharks were just kind of, like you say, were kind of curious.
We had one great big shark. Somebody named him Charlie.
Some guys were bleeding, and so you kind of keep away from them because they figured blood would strike shark.
Once the sharks took their first bite of this endless buffet of flesh, they were there to stay. The scene itself became a feeding frenzy of human meat.
The sharks start coming at us. It's like, fast. They would take the guys, shoot them up.
First day, I think we lost maybe 20 that first day. The second day was carnage all over.
Hundreds of sharks.
You knew that a damn shark had hit somebody because of the blood-curdling scream that they let out. Unlike anything you ever heard before in your life.
You didn't know when they were going to attack or not. And I was closer than you and me. And a shark came up from the bottom and took that buddy. And he just went up and they covered me with water, took him, and I never saw him anymore.
As the men began to be picked off one by the sharks, the troops put their wits to the test. They began to form small groups, to form together, and to form the illusion of a bigger shaped object to confuse the sharks. Maybe the sharks would think twice about attacking an object the same size of them. The survivors did this technique to either converse or uninterest the sharks. The plan was 100 proof.
We made a circle of that line, and the men now gathered inside the circle, which kept us fairly well together.
Slowly but surely, over time, the men would lose their grips due to either dehydration, loss of strength, or the actions being due to the surrounding elements, only to have them swift away with the swish of a random wave, or just being claimed by a shark waiting just a few feet away. Some of the remaining survivors state that sometimes the screams were so blood-curdling and unbelievable that their last fading screams of terror and pain would make you lose all hope and faith. And other times you'd be floating right alongside with your buddy, only to see him jerked under the waters, never to be seen or heard from again, with only blood resurfacing around the last known location. Sometimes there'd be screams of pain and panic, and sometimes the men would disappear without a trace. The survivors claim that the experience was one of the most awful, gut-wrenching, heart-pumping, scariest experiences of their lives. And remember, these men participated in many difficult combat missions, fighting in the middle of a war.
Basically, anybody who actually in the way of a shark is gone.
You had to stay in a group. If you was out there by yourself, the shark had you.
The only way that we could fight them all was to scream at the top of our voices.
It has been scientifically proven that sharks can and will play mind games with their predator movements on their prey. They are well known for this kind of behavior. In the attack strategy, the shark would brush against or bump into the distorted water-soaked survivor. This method was to convince their unsuspecting victim to let down their guard. For the men, these heart-stopping, terrorizing moments were a sure sign that it was time for you to make peace with your maker. This act meant that it could be minutes, if not seconds, of the last remaining moments of your life before your violent fate.
You could look out at any time and you'd see a big fin swimming around, and you're kind of in their road, and they go through, and they don't bother to miss you. They hit you, and that's the end of you, you know. You'd see someone out by himself, you would hear blood-curdling scream, and you look, and you see it go under 2 or 3 sharks there. You go and check your buddy, and you find that the bottom torso is gone. He's disemboweled, and so that's going to take place just so many times.
Every now and again, a decomposing corpse that was trapped in the bottom of the Indianapolis would resurface. The sharks were just as happy chowing down on the rotting flesh as a fellow comrade. Luckily, the distraction of the sickening act would give the survivors a few moments of peace, but not for long. One by one, friends, fathers, husbands, sons, war heroes gave the biggest fight of their lives in the last remaining efforts of this indefinite losing battle. As the day turned into night, darkness lingered in the approaching dim sunlight. Already, the men is in a constant battle with sharks, trying to stay afloat. No food, no water, constant sunlight, oil-soaked skin, attracting the sun causing third-degree burns, constant heat during the day, freezing temperatures at night, dehydration turning into hallucinations, violence and chaos. All conditions would eventually take its toll on the body and the survivors of their mental state.
The biggest problem we had was that water.
That water come across your mind so many times.
You know, so thirsty that your tongue begins to swell in your mouth. And then you see a little cloud coming over. And you see that it's going to rain. It's raining. Just a small cloud. But as it gets closer and closer, you see that it's raining. And, you know, you thank the Lord for the rain, for just a little bit of water. And then as it comes over, all you can catch it with basically is your mouth. But then you take your hands and you kind of cup your hands to catch some of that water, and you get a little bit of water.
We all got sunburned and had saltwater lesions in our joints and our arms and our legs.
A lot of them lost the will to live, even I suppose, and would nut down their head, drink their fill of salt water.
And then they would go out of their head. And
a lot of them had weapons like knives and all, that they would be so crazy that they'd start fighting among themselves and killing one another.
I can never forget these guys when they'd come up and say, well, we're going to go over to this island.
They said, I see an island out there and I'm going to swim to it.
You look at their eyes, they're lost. You see people when they're not there.
And he would announce maybe what he thinks he sees and try to get others to go with him. And here he swims out 25, 30 yards or so. And then at that time, with his frailing around in the water, you know, you'd hear that blood-curdling scream.
It went on and on, sitting there after I got in the raft, just looking, just all there was water, sharks, guys giving up, guys swimming away.
It's 110 degrees. Now, where are you going to get your water? You don't have any water. And some would dare maybe to drink a little salt water, but just wait a little bit. That brain with all of that salt in it, that man doesn't know straight up. He doesn't know you from a jab. He may take his sheath knife out and he stabs his buddy because he's a jab. And so we're losing, boys. And a little rain cloud came over, and you turn your mouth heavenward, and you're so thankful for that water. But if you could just see those faces, you'd see that they're all covered with oil. You know, you hold your mouth open, or you try to funnel some of that water in, but when that oil and all gets down in the tummy, it isn't long until that tummy says, we've got to come out, and it comes out. So you have no water, no water.
And we talked about when the sun was going down, and if they're not looking for us now, from Sunday night to Wednesday afternoon, they're not looking for us. They don't miss us. So us guys decided, well, hell, this is where we're going to die.
I saw some great heroism, and I saw some great fright, and I saw some things that I would never want to talk about.
Seconds felt like minutes, minutes felt like hours, and hours turned into days.
The third day seemed to be the day that was the hardest, and we lost the most men.
And Father Conway, he run into these men and they'd be burnt and dying, and he would try to comfort them and do what he could. And he exhausted himself completely. He became incoherent and he died from exhaustion.
We'd see airplanes way up in the sky, and we'd kick water and yell, and of course we looked like little pinheads from up there.
And just when you thought all hope seemed to be lost, a little bit of light began to shine through the darkness. At least as much hope as the surrounding elements and haunting conditions would allow. On the third day, the unlucky survivors caught a break. Suddenly, out of nowhere, was a couple of shipping crates that washed up nearby. So unexpectedly that some of the men thought they were just starting to hallucinate.
And we came upon a swell, and I saw something out there. And I told them, I'm going to swim out and see what that might be. And they said, but it's just some debris. And I said, I feel I've got to go. And I said, I'm going to go. And I made my way out there to whatever that is. But as I got closer and closer, it's just an old slatted crate.
After realizing that it was not just a mirage, the crates finally drifted close enough for the men to gather what strength they had left, and they swam closer to the floating boxes to investigate. Immediately, the men began to test the durability of the crates with their own strength. Sadly, the crates were not enough to hold any extra weight, but surprisingly, it could still offer an entirely different purpose. Although the crates and barrels could not hold the weight of an average-sized man, they could still do something. After days of floating in the water, the men's life vests had become waterlogged, making it more and more difficult for the men to move around. Now, the heavy water-filled life vest had become so unexpectedly weighed down that the men were having trouble staying afloat and keeping their heads above water. A few of the soldiers gathered whatever they could find to be used as using boot strings, shirts, pants, or anything else that could ideally be used for the strategy to entwine or connect the crates together. After the objects created a platform, the men began to set their life jackets on top of the crates to have the heat from the sun dry the water-filled vests. This plan worked perfectly, and the soldiers would keep rotating, taking turns. Upon inspecting one of the crates, they found that it held a few rotten potatoes at the bottom, which the survivors rationed out amongst themselves. The portions were certainly not enough energy for the men to keep going for days, but perhaps it would still serve a purpose and give them strength from the nutrients to keep their weakened bodies going for a few more hours.
You know what was in that? Potatoes. I recall reaching in and getting that first potato, and as I got a hold of it, the rot to squeeze through my fingers, rotten potatoes, but as I squeezed it, you know what? It was solid on the inside. And then to take that potato and peel that rot off and spit it out and have just a little bit of potato on the inside. And my buddies see that I'm eating something. What is it? And I make my way back kind of halfway. We met, and that's the water that we got, and that's the food that we had for 4.5 days swimming. Look. Well, it looks like it could be a raft. We are making our way, no doubt, toward them. They coming to us. They came into our group, and they said, when the sun goes down in the west, and the Philippines is there someplace. We're going to head toward the Philippines now. May I say, we didn't know it was another 500 miles to the Philippines, but it's time to do something. Anyone want to join us? And I say to my buddy Spooner, I'm going to go, Spooner, you're going to go with me. No, he wanted to commit suicide. He said, I'll swim down some 4 miles round before I'll come back up. I said, you're not going to do any such thing. We're going to go with that little raft. And those other sailors, they said, you're crazy. You can't swim to the Philippines. We said, yeah, but we can't make it if we don't try. And we start out. Those sailors that refused to go, not a one survived. We can't all hang around that little raft. And my buddy Spooner that had wanted to commit suicide, I said, Spooner, turn your back here. I'm going to tie you on where you can't get away. Daylight begins to break this 4th day, and somehow or another we kind of drifted away from the little makeshift of a raft, and I'm with this Navy Lieutenant McKissick and one sailor. And every little bit I checked this sailor because I'd seen this so many times. You know, it's easy just to drop your head in the water, and his head was in the water. I shook him, and he was still alive. The 2nd time, he's still alive. The 3rd time, he's gone. So it's just McKissick and myself. And we know that we can't make it, but at least we could converse a little bit, and we could pray.
After randomly floating across the ocean for 4 days, the surviving crew members of the Indianapolis was finally spotted by sheer coincidence by a United States air bomber on just routine patrol.
And all of a sudden, we saw and we heard a plane. Here he is out on a search and destroy in that Ventura. Lieutenant Wynn said, I looked down. He said, I thought I saw a flash of light, but as he started down, he came a little ways and he could see every way you look, bodies, shark. But I can see him today when Lieutenant Gwynn down and circled over McKissick and myself. I can see his face in that plane as he circled us 2 or 3 times, and he goes up and he breaks radio silence.
Airplanes go over every day while we're out there.
Every time we'd see a plane fly over, we were waving our hands and yelling.
And then there on that 4th day, I said, I hear a plane. And he likewise did. And at flying at 8,000 feet, he's going to come directly over us. And so what do? Well, we have renewed energy and strength and so on. And we began to splash water. We began to yell. We began to pray. Everything. And seemingly when he got to a point that had he gone any further, he would have gone over. But you know what he did? He made a dive. Lieutenant Gwynn made a dive down toward us.
When we saw that airplane, we knew we were going to make it then. Most beautiful airplane you've ever seen in your life.
It was a minor miracle that the aircraft that found us did find us.
Maybe we were out 140, 50 miles from base. And the sun's a little bit higher in that particular sector. You're flying right into the sun, and that particular morning that I was flying, it was clear. And when you're looking at a slick, calm ocean, it's just like looking into a mirror.
He says, I was flying at 8,000 feet. I'm looking out forward about 4 miles. I'm looking out on the peripheral vision about 2.5 miles each way. I'm looking at 20 square miles. And for me to see a man's head down there 6 by 8 inches in an old gray Kapok life jacket, impossible.
And old Ken said, hey, Morgan, he said, is that a plane? Right down on the horizon was a little dark spot going back and forth. And all of a sudden, a little flash of light came off of that dark spot. I said, that's a plane, isn't it?
He said that he had gone to check the aerial.
And there's the sun is setting there late in the afternoon. He sees the sun hitting the oil that's on our clothing.
And he had no idea what it was. He said there was no report of any American ships lost.
He thought it was a submarine down there.
And as he comes down, then ready to fire, so to speak, as he comes down, then what does he see? He sees boys.
The men on his plane wanted to parachute out and help them.
If he didn't find us the fourth day, none of us would have been here.
We call him our angel.
Our angel.
Our angel.
He wired back or radioed back to his base on Pelelu
to send out surface ships that would help us.
The aircraft quickly contacted the air control, sending out an SOS signal. Sadly, the men's struggles were not over yet. The current nearest ship vessel closest to the men's location was still miles away and would take a non-stop course overnight to reach the few remaining survivors. In fact, the nearest ship vessel was another Navy cruiser named the SSC Cal Doyle. The SS Doyle was considered to be the closest ship that picked up the distress signal. When the ship's captain was alerted, he quickly took the duty upon himself to contribute to the rescue of the Indianapolis despite any incoming orders and/or information for the ship to proceed. Although the survivors were spotted and rescue missions were underway, the men were still in danger and dying with every minute that they were in open waters. As the night skies began to set in, the men knew that the night rescue was out of the question, and soon realizing that they would have to spend another devastating night in the dark, wet, cold water, still being picked off one by one from the sharks lurking just inches below. Some survivors claim that at moments they thought they were walking on shallow waters because they felt the ground beneath them. In all reality, they were walking on the back of the sharks swimming right underneath. Still dying from injuries and still struggling with the remaining life-threatening elements like starvation and dehydration. Even though they have been spotted, that doesn't mean that they were rescued yet. As the night raged on, some of the remaining few began to sink and never rise with the morning sun. Day 5. As the early morning hours began to conclude, the USS Doyle was finally close to the surviving soldiers, but not close enough. If the crew of the Indianapolis had any chance of surviving the oncoming day, they could not stay in the water with these hazardous conditions any longer. Some way, somehow, they just had to keep fighting for their very survival. Luckily, Lieutenant Marks, a pilot on the rescue cruiser, took the duties upon himself to take one of the boarded planes, fill it with food, medical supplies, and fresh water, blankets, and survival gear, fly it by to where the SOS destination came from, and drop the supplies into the water. He knew that the survivors were barely hanging on.
Adrian Marks with the PBY came out.
On the way back to Pelelu, Lieutenant Adrian Marks, flying a PBY, flew over going the opposite direction. So I called him on the phone, asked him what was up. He said he was going to investigate a report that a number of people had been seen in the water by one of the Ventura planes.
And I said, make emergency flank speed. Minutes mean lives.
And that's the second plane we saw.
No matter what kind of training he had in the past, none of it could have prepared him for the upcoming horrors that he was about to witness. The sight of what he endured never could take place in his wildest imagination. As he approached the rescue zone, he began to drop supplies, witnessing the men still being violently ravished apart by the sharks.
He had to be very careful that they didn't drop something on us.
It took Dr. Haynes and me all afternoon to be able to read the directions of how to get these rubber rafts inflated.
We went over and got it, and 8 of us were able to get onto that raft.
I had a hell of a time getting on that raft.
They dropped some survival gear, some different planes. And myself and 3 other men thought we'd swim to this. And I was the only one that made it. 2 of them, how bad shape they're, their hearts stopped along the way. And the 3rd one was taken by a shark. So for all these years, I would be kicking myself in the tail because we made that decision. If we stayed where we was at, maybe them other 3 men would have lived. We don't know that.
They dropped some water kegs, but the water kegs were these small ones made out of wood. Well, when they hit the water, this just blew up.
The seal's broken. We didn't get any of that water to drink.
And it hit in front of me about 5 to 6 feet away. The bag split, the can came out towards me, and I grabbed for it and missed it, and I watched it sink.
Mark states that he did the only thing that he could think of to do, so he landed the plane as close as he could to the survivors. Since this was a rescue aircraft, it was equipped with platoons to be able to float upon the water. In the middle of landing, he damaged a platoon. With the platoon being a part of the landing gear, he wouldn't be able to take off or land the plane in a separate location. The pilot had become as stranded as the very men that he came to rescue, but he didn't let this action affect the mission that he set out to do.
Marks and his crew
Saw that they were scattered over a 25 square mile area. He and his crew
took a vote to see if they were going to land to pick up survivors or if they were just to go back.
The men back tunnel hatch who were dropping this gear reported to me that they were seeing men being eaten by sharks. And that really shook me.
But he decided to ignore the standing orders that this plane was not to be landing on the open sea. Well, he disobeyed that because of the serious situation. He radioed all ships in the area his exact location and told them to come and pick up survivors.
We had this message came through our ship, USS Bassett, APD-73.
So we were on patrol, and we were ordered to the scene of the sinking, which was some 12 hours away. I'm not sure exactly, but it was about noon.
We were actually on patrol off of Peleliu. All of a sudden, they called for flank speed.
With orders to proceed to an unknown location, latitude and longitude for unknown objects in the water. We didn't know what we were going to see.
I don't think they even knew on the bridge what was really there. We didn't even know what we was looking for.
Adrian Marks made a perfect landing in 8 to 12 foot swells of water. Popped about every rivet in his plane. They would never be able to take off. And it was at that particular point that Adrian Marks found out who these people were.
With quick thinking, he began to fill up the plane with as many survivors that would fit without an inch to spare.
We tried to get the ones that were closer to not surviving over to that plane.
You'd swim between the pontoon and the fuselage, and they'd throw you a line.
Adrian made the circle. The crew members would pull him into the plane.
I had this pneumatic life jacket, and I had a fellow on each side of me, and I was holding their heads up out of the water, and I kept hollering, how about us, or something. And these two guys reached down. One of them grabbed me by one arm, one guy grabbed me by the other arm, and just slung me in the plane.
On the plane, we were just laying in there like fish.
We were on the alert with all our, making our inspections and watching everything, but it was pretty fast for the Doyle. And we kept that up for several hours, and I finally called up the engineering officer and said, how long are we going to keep this flank speed up? And he said, we have an emergency. There's some ship sunk, and there's a PBY in the water, and he's calling for help. He's got guys all over the ship, and he can't do anything.
A PBY, I don't know normally how many men it would maybe hold, but certainly not 56.
He took all the newly brought rescue rafts and tied them together and around the plane. Despite all his efforts, there were still men in the water. Without hesitation, Marks helped the men lift themselves to the wings of the plane as he proceeded to lift the men out of the water with parachute cords.
And he says, some of you fellas mind crawling out on the wing? So I crawled up out through the hatch, and I crawled out way out on the end of the wing. And another one followed me, and another one. So
they put us all on there and took parachutes and tied us down.
The PBY that landed in the water, it saved some lives, but it cost about 50 lives. Because there's some people that tried to swim over to it, and they couldn't make it.
I was only a couple of 300 yards from him, but I just didn't feel like swimming that far.
Yeah, my best buddy, he was with me.
and he decided he was going to swim to the plane, and he drowned.
I just stopped and had to rest on my life jacket. I happened to glance down in the water, and there was this shark looking back at me. Oh, Lord, not now, not now.
We were still losing people. I think we lost them right up to the last minute.
After a while, we did see several planes, larger planes.
B-17, B-29s, and other planes flying all over the place and dropping kegs of water and life rafts and everything.
Then it got dark, and here up going into the clouds was a big, big round light. And we thought his angels had come.
After 5 days of hell, only some of the men were finally secure and safe, awaiting the SS Doyle's arrival and continue the rescue mission.
First ship that came in was the USS Doyle.
It was at midnight that the Doyle came to a sudden stop.
They shined their 24-inch searchlights against the clouds.
Captain Clater was afraid that if he don't show the light, that some of the guys that are barely hanging on won't hang on.
Gave us real hope.
The boat came alongside of the plane and took us off and put us over on the Cecil Royal.
And after they had sunk the plane, they took off and went back to Pelelu.
It was about midnight when we got there.
And decided that we better keep the spotlight on, or we weren't going to find anyone.
And didn't want to hit anybody in the water, so we stopped the ship, which, as I remember, was dangerous.
Theriault was the captain at that time. I do remember there was some argument.
Theriault was a coward. He really was a coward.
He was very defensive.
He didn't want the lights on, didn't want to go in the area because of fear of Jap ships.
He might have been worried about himself.
2 or 3 other officers, one on each side and one in the back, sent him to his quarters.
The executive officer took his place and kept this thing going, getting these people out of the water.
The driving force was to get these people out of the ocean. People said to heck with any danger. That was the attitude that everyone on board the ship had.
5 ships that we knew of started coming in to pick up the rescue work.
Real heroes were the guys who got in 4 LCVPs and went into the water and picked up the survivors.
All we see is clouds on the water, strange clouds. So we go to investigate the clouds. It's black bunker oil. Bunker oil, that's what we burn. You have to heat it to transfer it. And it's thick, heavy tar, glue on the surface. And we get in the boats to go out, look at this tar, and there are faces. Black hair, round eyes, white teeth. I mean, stone black, and it's midnight.
When this landing craft off of the Bassett came up to our group, the guy that was in there had a pistol, and he took the pistol out. He said, "Who are you?" And he says, "Identify yourselves."
And they come back, still got fight in them, just like a dumbass officer asking dumbass questions.
When they started swearing at us, well, he says, "Yeah, remember, you're from Brooklyn, what's the team? Dodgers. Oh, yeah."
We started yelling and hollering and so forth, and all of a sudden this searchlight came right on us. And thank the Lord, we were finally picked up.
And the first guy who was rescued was an ensign from the Indy. Who are you? What happened?
It was the first time that anybody knew the USS Indianapolis had been sunk 5 days earlier.
I had just come out of the engine room, and they were moving them in, and there was one kid they were helping into the thing, and I said, "What ship you off in?" He said, "Indianapolis." So I said, "Yeah, well, we just saw the Indianapolis and was heading back to the States." I said, "He must be wrong. It can't be the Indianapolis."
And I got picked up by the Bassett. They come with this floodlight. I didn't know who the hell it was, but I was going to get on anyhow.
Now I felt something behind me, like water splashing. And I looked up, there was that blasted ship right there. It was close from here across the street over there. And I said, "Oh, my God, we're watching this one here, and this one here's coming up on us."
Sitting there asleep on the life raft, and there's a guy put his hand on my shoulder and says, "Sailor, are you all right?" And I says, I am now. They pull up to me and they say, hey, sailor, can you climb up this rope? And they had rope ladders, and so I tried and I couldn't, so they jumped in the water and boosted me in the Higgins boat.
There was a couple in the water that needed help, and I was the only thing there. The only way I could help them was in the water.
He jumped in the water, shark-infested water, because some of these guys were so weak that they could not get them into the boat.
It could be you in that water. You would like somebody to try to help you out.
You know, we're not that old seasoned, and we're not undertakers, and we're not nurses. We're not trained for this, but we're doing it.
Some of them were, if you grabbed them, you know, the flesh would start moving on their hands.
Being in the water like that, and then also being burnt, you know, your flesh is real tender, you know.
He said you pick up your skin and just pile up like cordwood. Like one of them said, we're damn near pickled.
Now, if you washed a car or did laundry 1 hour, 2 hours in the water, figure what your skin is like. Now put yourself in the water 5 days. And I'm in a boat trying to lift the guy out of the water, and I grab him by his arms, and I lift under his arms. I feel the flesh separate from the bone. And of course he screams. I let go and grab the life jacket. And from then on in, I lift by the life jacket only.
Some of them just didn't believe they were being rescued, so they had to drag them aboard the LCVPs.
Another guy said to me, shove off, Jack, we don't need you. He's 5 days in the water.
They tried to pull one guy aboard, and he wouldn't come aboard. He said he was going home, and he jumped back into the water.
A rope ladder up the side of the ship, and I climbed on it, and they pulled me with that rope, got me up on board, and I thought, well, I could walk, and I got up and then fell down on my face.
Put me in one of those baskets, you know, well, what a wild ride that was. The Higgins went down and they jerked me up, and I thought, Christ, I'm going in again.
And they said, can you guys climb up the net? And I said, sure. I stood up. And that was the last thing I remembered till I woke up on the deck.
Any barges take us off to the hospital ship out in the harbor.
We were transferred to the Tranquility, which is a hospital ship.
And I went aboard it, discovered there was air conditioning, and had a nice white bunk to crawl in.
They put us on the hospital ship and sent us to Guam.
Then we got picked up on Friday morning by the USS Talbot.
And then they transferred us to another ship. And then they transferred us to another ship.
So the APD Ringness 100 pulled up beside us.
I was picked up by the Ringness. Well, the captain was on the Ringness, too.
Captain McVeigh was one of the first survivors. Charles B. McVeigh, commanding officer of the USS Indianapolis.
He wanted everybody taken care of before they looked at him.
We all took turns going topside and standing, and I saw plenty of sharks here. We were 5 knots, is just barely moving, and they would just lazily float around the ship. And they were, of course, I'm probably exaggerating, but they looked like they were 20 feet long at least.
To see a man floating in the sea upright in a life jacket, and then to find out that he has no legs, there's no lower body, he's been eaten by a shark, and to rescue this man. And you're 18, 19 years old and you're doing this. That's pretty tough.
Yeah, they buried quite a few that were floating this age, but most of them the sharks had been feeding on them.
Adrian Marks told me later, one of our reunions, that they picked me up last because they thought I was dead.
They took diesel oil and cleaned us all up.
On their hair and on their faces, we turned them upside down in a bucket of diesel.
I remember this old boss said, we're going to lay the bucket for this one.
One guy came up a blonde, the first one we'd seen blonde all night. So my God, we got a blonde.
They took real good care. Good care.
Yeah. Everyone participated. We had crew and officers.
Everybody played a role and did the best they could.
We're one-on-one trying to get these guys washed clean. First diesel oil, then soap and water, and then we find some clean clothes for them. Cut their clothes off. You can't touch them. We just have to get them stark naked and then cut them off. Some came aboard the ship with the bones of their toes showing.
There were so many sores on most of these people, you couldn't tell whether they were sun-induced sores or sharks or bang-ups against against the rescue vessel or what. I mean, a lot of them didn't even look human.
All the ones that we had laid out on the deck, you know, they're full of bunker oil from the ship that went down. They were
burned, they were short-bitten, out of their mind. They thought they were dead, they thought they were going to die, all of them.
I think I was as close to death as a person can be without actually going the last step.
We were just so damn close to death. It's just, one more puff of air, I think, about all we had.
After the rescue was complete, the reality of the situation began to accumulate. The aftermath of the whole experience started to sink in. 317 soldiers were brought out of the water. Out of 1,196 Navy seamen, only 317 lived on to fight another day. Finally, the endless battle was over, and the men no longer had to fight for their very survival.
The Doyle picked us up, and they picked up 96 survivors. So I understand there's 3 of them died on the way to the hospital. 1 died after we got there.
They never got medical attention in time. I often wonder what those parents felt like when they found out that their boy was saved but didn't make it. 3 out of 4 men died. Either got killed or died in the water or eaten by sharks.
We had about 200 as near as we could come, that were around there at the time. But they dwindled away over the days, and until they got picked up, there were only 60 left in our group.
Out of about 44 guys in our group, only 14 of us survived.
We were down to about 10 men in our little group.
There were 123 of us in our group. And when they picked us up, they said just in that general vicinity, kind of loose-knit group, there were 60.
I want to join my shipmates. When I go out, I want to be cremated, and I want the Navy to spread my ashes where the ship is.
After it's all over, you look and say, wow, what have I been through? Today, 60 years later, I still be living.
In the water, we signaled every night, but we didn't get any answer. So we thought we were the only ones that survived. Then we found out when we got to the hospital that there was 2 other groups. One went to Laylu and one went to Samara.
After Peleliu and dropped them all, we came back and we were part of the final search party. And we thought sure we'd find some more survivors, daylight, but we didn't. They brought back probably 6 bodies, but they were decomposing and it was hot and it was daytime now.
If you've never been around death, it's a terrible stench, and once you've been into it, you know what it is.
So that's when the captain decided to give him a little ceremony and let him go down in the sea.
The teenagers are out doing this. I'm 25. I'm an old man, and I'm directing them and guiding them.
We was there for, I think, 2 or 3 days in the hospital.
After the daring rescue, the United States government still kept the mission and rescue recovery a secret that would stay hidden without being released for another 2 weeks.
I know my corpsman and I had 8 survivors.
We stayed there almost a month in the hospital.
We were under tight security. We never got to talk to anybody but just our nurses and our foreman.
We were encouraged to write home, and of course it'd be censored. But write home as if the ship was still alive, still afloat.
Well, every letter, even our letters, had to be censored. If they mentioned Guam, if they mentioned Miss Sable, my nurse.
Had troops around us because they didn't want anybody to know that we had been sunk.
We were never allowed to tell the disaster until after it was announced.
Local radio station there on Guam had the music playing, and all of a sudden they cut in on the music and announced the war was over.
The American government withheld the information until the secret mission of dropping 2 atomic bombs on Japan and its surrender. Therefore, the United States government knew about the sinking and the remaining survivors, but yet chose not to contribute and continued to tell no one until the bomb was dropped in fear of losing the upper hand. The story was finally forcefully released on American media, but it was on the same day that Japan had surrendered, so the story went unnoticed, if not any attention at all, because of the bigger news of Japan surrendering.
It ended the war. They brought the bomb, they dropped the bomb, and 2 weeks later, it was all over. We could go home.
Back in the States, The headlines were Japanese unconditionally surrender in small print on the front page. The USS Indianapolis sunk with 100% casualty.
On July 6, 1945, around 8:15 a.m., an American B-29 bomber dropped the world's first deployed atomic bomb, nicknamed the Little Boy, by parachute onto the Japanese city of Hiroshima, detonating the bomb about 2,000 feet above the city itself. The explosion immediately killed an estimated 80,000 people, and tens of thousands more would later die from radiation exposure. The blast radius equaled to about 12 to 15,000 tons of TNT, destroying 5 square miles. 3 days later, at 11:02 a.m., a second B-29 dropped another A-bomb named Fat Man onto Nagasaki, killing an estimated 40,000 people. Despite being built to be more powerful, killing less civilians, Fat Man weighed nearly 10,000 pounds and was built to produce a 22 kiloton blast. Topography of Nagasaki was one nestled in narrow valleys between mountains, reducing the explosion effects, limiting the destruction to just 2.6 square miles. And on August 15, 1945, around noonish, the Emperor of Japan announced his country's surrender in fear of a third bomb being dropped that has been falsely threatened by the United States. Just recently have the Americans perfected the atomic bomb. We can thank the Manhattan Project for humanity's worst invention. The Manhattan Project was led by the United States alongside with Great Britain and Canada under a scientific directive of a member of the Communist Party, Dr. Robert Oppenheimer. And it came about due to rising fears that Nazi Germany was developing a nuclear weapon. At the same time, America was in the middle of a scientific technology race with Russia. So how did the Russians get the atomic bomb so early? Scholars suggest that Soviet spying probably allowed the USSR to develop the atomic bomb 6 months to 2 years faster than they would have done. The Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb, known in the West as Joel 1, on August 29, 1949. Surprisingly enough, America went on to spy on Russia within 15 years' time. After the rescue of the survivors from the sinking ship of the Indianapolis, the captain of the ship was later put on trial because, according to the Navy law, he didn't apply to the routine directions to move in a zigzag pattern across the ocean. His rebuttal claims that the reason behind his actions was because if the Japs sent a commonly referred to as the Heaven Shaker, then it wouldn't matter what direction or patterns that they were moving. Now, this was a very reasonable argument. The item commonly referred to as the Heaven Shaker just so happened to be a man-controlled torpedo controlled by a living pilot on the suicide mission. This machine is 100% real. What you would do is get a Japanese soldier to get into this one-man operated submarine with a torpedo attached to it. You would later be ejected out of a larger submarine and sent on a kamikaze mission. These tactics were commonly used by Japan toward the end of the war. I myself have never heard of these. Now, there is a Japanese word for them, but I cannot tell you how to even begin to pronounce. After years of mental health problems, Captain McVeigh took his own life at the age of 70, following years of efforts by other survivors and friends to clear his name. McVeigh was exonerated by the 106th United States Congress and President Bill Clinton on October 30th, 2000. It has become deeply sad to see that these American heroes lay down their lives in the most horrific ways, only for the story to be swept under the rug and quickly forgotten about with the passing of time. Next time that you hear mention World War II, atomic bombs, and or even sharks, then I hope that your thoughts and prayers go out to the friends and families and crew members of the USS Indianapolis. The object of this channel is to stand outside the box, take in all the basic information provided by claims and documents, do your own research, and then come up with your own conclusion that best fits your own belief system. So thank you for your patience, and thank you for your time, and thank you for your support. And I hope that you've learned something new. I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you again real soon on the next episode of Forgotten History, the only series that unearths history's buried secrets.